All right,
The
here we go.
original. All right,
I
here we
think
go.
I think we're good.
Now it says here this meeting is being live streamed. Should I just click on got it?
Yes.
Alrighty.
Yeah, we're here. All right. It's a miracle, folks. We're back. I'm starting to get the hang of this live streaming thing, but well, this is JWC live stream, and we're here. It's Ricky and Tom, and it's what is it? Writing topics. What are we? This is JWC Story Autopsy for Writers with Ricky and Tom.
Mm-hmm.
I'm Ricky, and go ahead, Tom. Introduce yourself there.
Obviously, I'm Tom.
Yes,
So
yes. And
we are good.
yes, we are. We just got back from a little vacation. Mine was a staycation, but Tom, you went off to where did you go, Tom?
Mostly, we were in Hollywood, Florida, which is just south of Fort Lauderdale.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's gorgeous there.
Yeah.
What did you end up doing? How long you were there for 2 weeks?
Almost 2 weeks. We did 4 days with my wife's first cousin in Port Charlotte, which is on the west coast, south of Tampa, and they have a really wonderful warm saltwater pool, which is where we spend a lot of time.
Cool.
And it's a great pool. You don't have to do any maintenance really. No bugs or slime or anything develop in it because of the salt water, and it's very cool. We ate a lot of fish, and we played a lot of cards, and we went to Hollywood, and we basically go there to do nothing, just to reset.
That's a beautiful thing to center the psyche, as it were.
Yep.
And how many years have you been doing that?
Oh boy, right about 10 years.
And because the reason I ask, I don't mean to pry, but you have this thing you do where you're so creative. You have so much creative force that I mean, and if I went on vacation, I guess I would try to do the same thing. But you're the one that thought of it. You have a novel project just for vacation.
I do.
And we want to hear all about that. What it boils down to for me is you've been going to this Florida, the general location in Florida, for the last decade. When did you start with the whole concept of I have a vacation project, or the quote unquote Florida novel that you've talked about?
What's it called? I would say the May of Memorial Day week of 2018.
Oh.
I had recently seen there's a show called Destination Truth with a crazy guy, a lovable guy named Josh Gates, and he did a segment. We'll talk about what it was about, but it struck a chord. I said, "Wow, that's a pretty interesting." And that one, it was about what the first half was about this island in South America with these dolls that are haunted. That was pretty creepy.
Yeah.
But the second half really, really made an impression on me. So by the time I got down to Florida, and I stood on the beach at night, I was thinking, what if something came out of the ocean on certain times of the year and snatched people off the beach? So I started thinking about that, and then a thunderstorm came up. I said, a thunderstorm would be perfect. It's wet and it's dark.
Moody.
And this thing would come out and he'd be at home because he'd still be wet, and then I threw in another thing. What if it was during a new moon, when there was no moonlight, pitch blackout, and that's where it took off. I said, this is so, and I thought of parameters. It can't be just everywhere in Florida. It would have to be a certain place. So say from North Miami up to Boca Raton. It just wanders up and down the coast. This creature.
Now,
at first,
is it always during a storm, or is the storm exceptional to?
No, new moon, thunderstorm. If it's in the area,
you could get so much mood out of that. I can imagine breaks in the clouds, and Oh, well, wait. You said new moon, huh?
New moon. No moonlight at all.
Black moon, which you know what that means. Yeah. So
So,
that is fantastic as far as the origin of all this, and you've been working on that since 2018. I guess I'll turn this over to you as far as data, but like I have so many questions in and of itself. Well, why don't you go over like where you're at with this project? Because I think our JWC community and anybody who's listening right now would want to know like, oh, I have a project that I only work on during vacation. And it's like some people do take writers vacations. I mean, you're going to see the sights and to have the experience too. But you said it yourself. Well, we just go to relax and to center. So that you're creatively centering. So go ahead, Tom. Tell us about that.
well, it started off with just making generalized notes about what it could be. First, I was going to make this. There's a story I happen to love by Joseph Payne Brennan called Slime. It's about this ball of jet black slime that's alive that gets thrown inland by a storm, and it's just basically it's a story of it trying to get back to the ocean, and it eats everything in its sight, deer and mice and people, and it happens in the middle of the night, so it knows it has till dawn to get home, and I always thought it was a fantastic story, and
Sounds
I said,
great.
let me do another thing about a blob. And I said, no, that's too close. So I said, I have to think of another kind of creature.
Yeah.
So what lives in the ocean that could come out and not suffer any ill will, any ill effects, you know. And so I'll leave that for later on. So I started making notes about what could happen. I said I needed a hero, and I needed a place to setting. So we stay in a place called Enchanted Isle Resort. So I said, I'm going to I'll change the resort name to Mystic Cove.
Yeah, that's right.
And I kept that on the same exact address.
That's great.
And I took the people that were working there and I told them what I was going to do. They all said, ooh, I want to be in your book. So I said, okay. So I took the daytime manager, I took the reservations manager, I took the owner's son is the overall manager, and he's sort of an antagonist. And he basically is not a bad guy, but he doesn't want any negative publicity coming to the resort.
It's understandable.
So he covers up anything that the first murder that happens right in the back of his resort on the beach, and so he
in your book.
Right.
Yeah, let's make sure.
I'll make that sure. Yeah, nothing happens at that beach at all.
Yeah.
Nothing happens there.
Yeah, and it's a work of fiction, folks. Pure fiction.
So I had the main character is a cookbook author named Jake Connolly, who inherits the condo right at the resort that's right on the beach. And so his first night there, he's settled in a little while. This thunderstorm rolls in during new moon, and he hears somebody yelling, "Help! Help!" And he looks outside, and he sees this overweight guy panting. He crashes into these beach chairs and falls over, and the guy says, "Oh my God!" But then this blackness just passes over the guy, and then a few seconds later, the guy's gone.
And he's just gone, like he got yanked,
swallowed up by darkness.
Yeah, nice.
And so the guy goes outside with his flashlight, his phone, and he's poking around, and in among the crashed chairs, he finds this patch of blood on the sand.
Oh,
and
man.
he has a Ziploc bag in his pocket from he was eating nuts, and he throws the nuts away, and he puts a handful of the sand in the bag, seals it, but there's also a lump he feels, and he pulls it out. It's a finger that has a ring on it.
Oh, man.
Right? So he goes, oh, and I need another Ziploc bag. So he runs back in, and he puts everything in the freezer, and then he goes, okay, what just happened? Something took this guy off the beach and left his finger behind and some blood, and so that was all just a basic outline that I had. That's all I had when I went home the first year. Except the title. The title on the way home, I came up with the title, Blood on the Sand. I said, that should be an intriguing enough title for someone who says, blood on the sand, whoa. So
Yeah, I have a feeling that that'll work. And so that was the first muse, as I call them, muse flash. That was your muse flash for this project. Now, when did you realize that you were going to do this cyclically, that you were going to write this year after year? When did that occur to you?
probably when I got home, I took all my notes and I started typing them up. And I said, okay, I'm going to start this book. And I started writing the first chapter. I was like, I'm not feeling it. I said, I said, this is really odd. So I said, what I'll do is I'll take all my notes with me. I'll type all the notes up and I'll bring them with me to Florida, see what happens. The next time we went to Florida, I open my notes. What happens is my wife and daughter stay up late, and I go to bed a reasonable time. And when I get up about 7 o'clock, 7:30, I know they're not going to be getting up till 10, 10:30. So I have 3 hours to myself. That gives me time to take a nice walk along the beach, and then come back and I can make some green tea for myself, and I sit down with my book and I write. So I did that, and I opened up. I had my tea, and I opened up my notes. I read them, and all of a sudden it hit me. I said, I know exactly what I want to do. I just started writing, and so I discovered this could be an odd thing that I'm really inspired when I'm down there.
Yeah, yeah. And I noticed too, like all other creatives, you have a little ritual. You center yourself. You went for a walk, you make yourself a nice beverage, you're relaxed, isolated, and then the creativity flows.
Right.
And you knew back when you went back home, you were like, well, this is a project that because the muse, I guess, laid out enough road ahead of you where you were able to go, well, this is a novel, it's not a short story, right?
Right. Yeah, it had to be.
Mm-hmm.
Just that second visit with all it just opened up to me. That I said that he's got to try to figure out what's going on, and that could take some time. And so I said I went to AAA and I got a nice couple maps of the area, and I went and I also walked and I got the local maps of the East Coast, exactly exactly what I needed from say Daytona down to Miami, and I had all the little towns jotted down, and I just started making a list of towns, and then I figured out that it went south, in say September, October it went south,
Yeah.
and in March, April it drifted back north. So I said, okay, I've got a cyclical creature here.
Yeah.
And
absolutely. Well, it gets hungry and it's got to do what it does. Its migration center around its prey wherever it gets food, I would imagine.
Right.
And that's very interesting. So you used your you like it's the range of predation. You use that to determine where your chapters were going.
After a fashion, once Jake and he meets a woman, he goes north trying to First he goes to newspaper archives looking for see how far back these disappearances go, and they go back over 40 years.
Oh wow!
But they haven't. They're just so isolated here and there, here and there, here and there that nobody's pieced it together yet. That it's actual one mystery rather than 100 missing persons. It's right.
Yeah,
So
it gets into the concept of cryptid culture. There are some cryptids that people they may not believe it, but they've heard of it. This one doesn't have cryptid culture yet. No one knows that this thing is doing what it's doing because people go missing all the time.
right.
So if it's not criminality, it's the Dave Politis missing 411 factor, abduction phenomena concerning ufology, could be anything. But if it's mysterious and this big blob of slime that leaves blood smears behind it when it does, that's a particular MO. So yeah, go ahead.
So he's a little farther north. He's just near Boca Raton, and he's doing some research. He goes to a lot of libraries, and this librarian comes in to help him. Her name is Elaine, and she's gorgeous, right? And he notices her, and she notices him, and she says, I want to find out what this guy's doing. And she doesn't know. They both notice neither one of them have rings on their hands. So she comes by. She goes, "Oh, what are you doing some research on? And he doesn't want to tell her about the blood, and so I'm looking at the missing persons cases. She goes, oh, I'm crazy about unsolved mysteries. I watch that show all the time, and I watch ID Channel, etc., etc. So she goes, tell me more. So he tells her a little bit more. She goes, oh, that sounds really great. So he goes off, and he's at his hotel. He goes to the diner the next morning nearby, and she comes walking in with this stack of papers. She goes, I found more missing persons for you. And so they start talking, and so they go together. Basically, they become a couple because she said, I'm a volunteer there, and she says, I'm independently wealthy. I just do it because I'm bored. She goes, but this sounds like something I wouldn't be bored with. Would you mind if I help you? He says, sure. And they slowly fall in love, and
it sounds great, man. And I've heard you paint with that before. You have a good way with adding romance along with this tension, because obviously they start putting pieces together and realize that this phenomena has not only been going on for decades, but it's ghastly. And so I love the way that this is. Now, when you were writing this time, during this vacation, because again,
right.
This is your Florida novel. You do this every year. So and that's just so fantastic. But what did you end up working on this time? And relatively speaking, where are you in this project?
I think I'm about half done, which is great.
Okay.
So this time I delved into they run across a creature that it lives in the Bahamas. It's a cryptid, and I said, that's exactly what that Destination Truth episode was about, where they went to one of the islands in the Bahamas is called Andros Island.
Yeah.
And the place is dotted with these things called blue holes that are like bottomless.
Wait,
right?
Are they like sinkholes under the water?
Yeah, and they're surrounded by rock. They look like just holes dug into the ocean, and they're surrounded by like little atolls, and nothing lives there because they're just the oxygen gets sucked out of the water, but it's not fresh, in a way.
Yeah.
And but there's a legend of a creature that lives in and around Andros Island called the Luska.
Oh, and
which
that brings us to our paranormal perspectives segment, where we go over cryptids. And you're saying, in the general ballpark of where you are down there, when you write your books, there is cryptid culture concerning this Luska. What's that all about?
Well, it has various descriptions. I rejected a lot of them, but one of them is it is a jet black giant octopus that preys on fishermen and pulls people off the beach, and basically all these disappearances happen in and around the blue holes. And I said, okay, I have this thing. What if it was one of these Luska wandered over and wound up along the Florida coastline and just continued doing what it loves to do, and it found that the food is a lot better in Florida because there's a lot more people,
Yeah. What did you eat? What did you eat when you were in Florida, Tom? That's one question I got to ask you right away.
We discovered that we had a new food. I have a list in my head of new foods that I try to, if I eat something new, I say, oh. So we had alligator tail.
Whoa, okay.
Good stuff.
What was that like? Did it taste like chicken? Were you rubbing your belly?
It was more like a cross between a shrimp and scallop in a way.
Ooh, well, that's I would have never imagined.
They said they
Go ahead.
Good. The secret is buttermilk. They soak it overnight in buttermilk. Takes the gaminess out of it.
Right on. All right. Well, if we're ever going to prepare some alligator tail, let's not forget the buttermilk. So, all right. So that was our cryptid corner, and there's nothing, especially when you're writing paranormal fiction or paranormal fantasy or whatever you want to call it. There's nothing like a good cryptid encounter. And because cryptid encounters are they bring about cryptid culture, where people see these things, and cryptid culture is like a timeless urban legend.
Hmm.
What it boils down to is people have been seeing monsters since before there was history.
Yeah.
So if you bring it down to this, and it comes all the way up to the present, maybe people have been seeing. I mean, in this instance, it's decades. People have been seeing this your monster in your novel, but it hasn't broken through to cryptid culture. It's just that there's been victims. It's not even that people have seen it, but
Hmm.
other things like skunk apes, or the Mothman, the chupacabra. There are mysterious places in the earth. You don't have to believe in these things, but you should read about them if you're a writer of fiction, because their mystery will inspire you.
Hmm.
The records of people who have claimed to see these things, even if they're in a state of hysteria or derangement, just the story alone will tickle the Lovecraft in any writer, because he did a lot with that. Just one name drop alone.
Right.
But as I've been working with Nidhogg Chronicles, which took a huge, I was about halfway through it, and I was like, wow, I don't know if this can go on like this. Like, it was getting a little. I don't even want to say halfway. I want to say a quarter way. It was getting humdrum, but it ended with this one cryptid encounter, and then it took off in a total different direction. Um, and I'm just having a total blast with that project, which is filled with the same type of stuff, the paranormal fiction or paranormal fantasy. So, anything else you want to say regarding your Florida novel? Have we covered all the bases?
One interesting thing is I have it's this creature is exactly the same creature that later on in another book kills Emily Breck.
I was gonna ask
Ah.
you. See, it reminded me, because Emily ends up. I mean, spoiler alert, but Emily ends up in the general area. I mean, and what's not to love about Florida, and what's not mysterious about Florida? They have a lot of legends down there, and the country is so beautiful as
Right.
far as like the landscape and whatnot. Um, but when you did Emily, I know you were having her take a journey from the upper East Coast to the lower East Coast. We'll say as diplomatically, so we don't spoil it too much. But you were plotting that out, and I guess that whole concept of what is feasible for her to journey versus her deaths.
Right.
So you were kind of designing a chapter outline based around the location of her various deaths, because she has a unique cosmological crisis going on. And how, like, because you're a pants seater, Tom, and we're about to get into that whole concept. To pants seat or not to pants seat, that is the question. People who just like to write and let it flow out. I used to be one of those fellers. I got very heavy into outlining, and I want to go over a little bit of that on
All
my
right.
end. But
Okay.
but you give us this as far as Emily Breck. And what's the difference between because you don't outline normally, but
No.
what's the difference between your outlining process with Emily Breck and the Florida novel?
Emily came from a. It's a book. My book is it's 3 volumes. The Curious Journey of Emily Breck. It came from about 2.5 pages of notes written about 1:30 in the morning, 2 Aprils ago, April of 2020. Wow, more than that. She's 2 years old now, and that was pretty much the outline. I knew she dies 7 times, and I had all 7 of her deaths plotted out. I knew the locations, and I filled in. She was killed by this. She's killed by this. She's killed by this. And it was I had to do what I did to do with Emily and Jake. They do a crossover.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
Emily meets Jake in her book, and Jake meets Emily in his book. And so in Blood on the Sand, the very last victim of this creature is Emily. And the Curious Journey of Emily Breck, uh, she is killed in Emily's not life number 6. She's killed by the Luska. Um,
yeah.
so I could not resist it. I mean, they were in the same place at the same time. I said, and she died. I said, why not kill her off with the creature that's in the other book that I'm writing? And it was beautiful. I had a great time with you know I
Crossovers are fantastic. I did that, like I said, I think I said last time before the vacation. I'm doing that with Nidhogg Chronicles versus my Songs of Agarte story out of Corporate Gothic, which is a JWC thing. Anybody wants to go check that out, corporategothic.com. But crossovers are so fantastic because they deepen the world of
mm,
fiction, and they help create paradigms, like the concept of the Lovecraft circle. The fact that H.P. Lovecraft developed this whole writing style that became cosmic horror, and there are other people who wrote in his similar mode.
mm-hmm.
And when you do crossovers, there's a little bit of that in there. It's almost as if like you're setting that up, you're thickening the mixture. When did it occur to you? Because when did Emily happen? Like which news happened first, the Florida novel or Emily?
The Florida novel was cooking for, let's see, 2018, 19, 20, 20, about 3 years it was going, and I had a great idea. I had an idea. I knew exactly who the villain was in Blood on the Sand with Jake,
Yeah,
and he's in Hollywood, Florida. Um, and so Emily came along, and when I got to life number 6, where she's working in, essentially she's working. There's a place called Margaritaville,
yeah,
in Hollywood, Florida. I changed it to the Blue Pelican, and it's like same place.
yeah,
So,
right.
and Jake is doing research on a book on restaurants and places to eat in Hollywood, because that's his thing. He had already had 8 or 9 books. One in New Orleans. He did one in St. Louis. He goes to a town. He stays for 6 months. Comes out with a book about the tastes of New Orleans. Let's say. And so he moved to Hollywood. He says, I might as well do a book in Hollywood. He finds out there's a lot of great food, and there is. That's one thing I like to do, is throw in local flavor in my stories, especially this book. So he's walking around. He comes to the Blue Pelican, and he goes in. He sees that they're putting in a new burger joint, and he's looking. He goes, "Wow, burgers! I love burgers." And Emily comes up. She goes, "Can I help you?" And they have a conversation. And she goes, "Oh," she goes, "Give me." He gives her a card. He goes, "I'll call you when the burgers place is open. You could be there at the opening night." He says, "Excellent." He goes, "I'll," and he walks away and done. And that's from Jake's point of view. And in the other point of view is I just reversed the point of view, you know, and
Yeah,
then later on when Emily is killed in Blood on the Sand, he feels really bad because he knows her,
yeah, sure.
right?
Sure, yeah. You're. I gotta tell you, man. We're gonna have to get back to this Emily thing too. I'm excited we were able to unpack Florida and talk about all this crossover and outlining and stuff. But I want to get back to Emily. I want to ask you about that project. Where are you at with querying and stuff? Because I read that whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was a couple drafts ago, but what I read there was tasty. I mean, she is such an authentic character, and the story you're weaving. It's like there are parts when it's delightful, there are parts when it's like eerie and mysterious, and it's like warring between light and shadow. The
Mm.
local flavor and culture, and the lifestyle that she's living, running from death to life to death to life like that.
Right.
um it's like it makes it very dreamlike. It's you don't know. It's like you don't know what's coming. But back to the book craft of it all. Like, where are you with query letters? Have you been here? I mean, you just got back from vacation, so I don't
Right.
even know if you read your mail or whatever. But
I'm picking up the querying again of agents, and now that I've done a revision of the very beginning. We could go over that. Basically, I just chopped out the first chapter, and I had it start. The book starts with her waking up in bed. She's already died, one time. I thought that was a stronger way to start the book, and I have a whole new set of query letters going out to people, because I got the impression from agents and readers that the first chapter was way too dark, and that the rest of the book was really fun to read, but that first chapter was, you know, like dipping ice cream on a stick into cement. you know?
yeah, and I can say honestly, having read the whole project, that I agree. And this is why I wanted to stop and go over this a little bit, because the fact of the matter is that when we write very passionately, and we have a muse that we're trying to impress or be faithful to. And once a project's done, though, there is an industrial component when you're trying to actually get it out there. Like in your instance, you're going legacy print, classic print. You want an agent, you want a publishing house to pick it up, and it's worthy of that. But
Thank you.
yeah, definitely. But you went out and you got beta readers, and you started getting opinions, and then you did query letters, and this I thought was very wise. And when you got responses from the query letters, you correlated them to the beta readers, and if there was any similarity that could help your document, you used it to refine your process, which is admirable, but logical in this instance, because like you said, the first chapter, I mean, I liked it, but overall, talking about the whole project, it's misleading. They are right, because if you think, oh boy, this dark mess is what I'm going to get for however many tens of thousands of words, and it ends up not being that way.
Right. It's short. It's like 4.5 pages, 5 pages, and it's done, and it picks up, and she's a completely different person, and it just takes off from there. But yeah, I decided it's a good idea to. It was a good idea to. Well, what I did was I cut it, and I incorporated it into her second life, where every time she goes to sleep, or daydreams, she has this flashback, a little tiny piece of flashback of that first life, of what led her to falling out of her window and falling 14 stories to her death.
Yeah.
And I think it works a lot better. And so it starts with a bang, instead of oh my God, where's my drugs?
Yeah, well, that's
which
the
was.
thing. It was very, very dark, reminded me of Burroughs' Junkie. And then once she breaks free from that terrible place, then it becomes something else entirely. But it does not shed an aura of eeriness and mystery, which is appropriate for any paranormal fiction. In fact, I think it exemplifies that as it goes along. So definitely in a coming episode, we're going to have to get our ducks in a row and go over that process, because the concept of the query letter and how it helped you, I'd love for you to really amplify and magnify on that, so another episode probably.
That works.
But it gets to the point now where you use maps and stuff for Emily. You use maps for the Florida novel to either go on a point A to point B journey, or you use it as a radius of activity for cryptid.
Right.
And therefore, this is the range of how it prowls. And it feeds on animals, it feeds on humans, and it goes in a black moon and a thunderstorm precedes it, I'd say that's sufficiently monstrous.
Yeah, it's virtually invisible when it
Yeah.
comes up on the beach. New moon, the storm clouds, and I mean, it comes, grabs somebody, goes, and you could be walking with a bunch of people on the beach. It could come ashore, grab the last person in line, I'll have Dave
Yeah.
Politis,
Yeah.
and be gone.
Absolutely. So, this is where I'll step in, and I'm going to ask you questions just to see what the commonality is. But I do a thing with my novels called word budget, where I design based on industrial norms. Like with KDP, you have to, like Kindle Direct Publishing, in case we're wondering, you have to have a minimum of like around 30,000 words to bind a hardback book.
Mm.
Now, the translation for that is that if you're going to do bookcraft and design books of a certain length, like for example, Nidhogg Chronicles is 56,000 and change. My book of Masroth is like 86,000 and change. So you're dealing with a pretty decent size document. But the commonality between the two of those and between any work of fiction, at least in my opinion, is a 3-act structure.
Mm.
Not breaking any ground here, but just to amplify on it a little bit and why it's perfect. Or at least as perfect as you're going to get. And no one has to use any kind of outline. But if you do, I mean, this is the basis thing, because everything in the universe is a 3 from a certain perspective.
Mm.
Like I have it as Act 1 is origin, birth, and genesis of a character or a concept. And that is generally coincided by your first muse flash, which is the act of creativity coming into consciousness. You could be like, we'll give an example. I had a muse flash for Storm World, Azaoth, where there was a cat snake. There was this combination life form of both cat and snake. And I was watching some kind of documentary or something, and this like lightning came into my head. And then I realized, well, whoever has that, imagine if that's a pet. And then this character is Jazz, of Toy Island. She came online. It's the same thing with Chardile's Snakeborn, the shamaness. I was reading your story and I was inspired by this one scene with a snake in a backyard. That later chapter of
Yep.
Emily. This is one of these examples where creative iron sharpens creative iron, because I was reading it like, oh no, I was looking like, what's going to happen to poor Emily? And I don't dig on snakes too much, me. So when I saw that little, and I'll leave it wide open. I won't do any spoilers. But I thought of this character, and by thought I mean muse flash came into my mind. So the Act 1 in the three act outline that I use is, generally speaking, that first muse flash, where the idea of the main character or the concept or whatever scam you're using, like in this instance with Azaoth, it was the cat snake.
Right.
That brought stuff online. Do you remember any classic muse flashes that happened to you where like do you remember when Emily came online? Because that would be your first act in the 3-act structure.
Right.
So do you remember anything like that?
Oh, sure. I had a horrendous head cold, April 14th of 2020, and kept me in bed for 2 weeks.
Oh.
And yeah, maybe 10 days. Still.
I think I remember that. Yeah, go on.
I had dragged myself up here to do our Tuesday meeting twice.
Yeah.
But middle of the night, I had this dream about this woman falling out of her apartment and landing in a dumpster, and then waking up in bed, and then traveling to Jackson, New Jersey, and having getting a job, and then getting killed by these crazy people like out of this movie Motel Hell. Where they were just these cannibal maniacs that once in a while killed one of their employees. And then I just kept. I had 5 more, and I woke up and it was all in my head. All these 7 deaths. I said, I just went to the kitchen table, took my pad. I took a marble notebook, and I wrote down Emily Book 1, and I just wrote down the notes. And I had like 2.5, 3 pages of all details, and then I wrote enough where I said, okay, my muse said, okay, you could go back to bed now, because you have enough now to run with.
I'm telling you. Though the author of The Birds and Rebecca, she's a French author from the day,
Right?
like 100 years ago or so. Maurier, I can't.
Daphne du Maurier. Yep.
That's right. She said how her novels meddle in her life. It's not that she meddles in them;
right.
They meddle in hers. And I was reminded of that. There's so many great writers who have said the same thing. That's why I use the term creative obsession, because you might have been tired, but when that muse struck, you had to write that down.
I could not ignore it. Imagine if I did, I would not have Emily. I would not have this 175,000 word creation.
A series,
Woo.
for sure.
But you were talking about the three act, the beginning, middle, and end. Let's say.
Yeah.
I just realized that all of Emily's lives, all the chapters, except the end, have a beginning, middle, and end point, just like a 3-act structure. Which I'll have to think about that. That's really interesting. That I hadn't thought about that till just now. That she'll come to a new town, she'll start making a new life. She gets settled in, she's happy, then things start to happen. Boom, she gets killed. Moves on.
Yeah, and that's the thing. The more I find out about the 3-act thing, the more it's helpful and beneficial, but it's inevitable. Everything is a 3-act structure. Like, everyone is born, origin or the genesis of the person. So then we'll touch on Act 2, which is the journey, the life. Like, you're born, you live, and then you die. There's an origin, there's a journey, and then there's a destination. A genesis to the legend, the path of the legend, and the terminus of the legend, how it all plays out. That could be talking about individuals or collectives, because everything is a narrative, really. If you study consciousness, you're studying the story of mind. If you study awareness, it's like you're studying the story of spirit, like the instinctual and sensorium and all this other stuff. So when, like, as far as your journey, you had that dream, and never underestimate a good delirium. That's one thing I've learned creatively.
Sure.
I always try to read the kookiest stuff when I have some kind of fever or whatever, because it gets you, like, you had that dream and you were smitten. You had to write it. But when did the second muse flash happen in the case of Emily? Because that's the key. There has to be an Act 2. There's the first muse flash, which is everything comes online. Her name is Emily. You're busy scrolling notes. Then you're tired. You're like, oh, but I have to. The muse, I have to do it. But the second muse flash, which is generally that Act 2, that pulls you in, and then they start orbiting around each other. These acts. And that'll lead to 3. But when it came to Emily, when was your second muse flash? Like, that would be the equivalent of an Act 2?
I probably realized that it was going to be something when she died the second time.
Yeah.
And she woke up, and for some reason I knew exactly where she was going. I said she's dead. She's near at Jackson, New Jersey. She wakes up. She's going to get on a bus and go to Virginia Beach. I said, okay, fine. And I just wrote, and she had found a whole new life there, and so I knew that was going to continue, and that this snowball, as it were, or the story was smaller at that time. But I said, no, I've got to keep pushing it up toward the top of the hill, and it'll get bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
Um, but by contrast, Blood on the Sand with Jake has a definitive beginning, middle, and end. Right? Its beginning is him inheriting the condo and seeing the first murder and starting to do some looking into missing persons. The middle is where he starts realizing that this has been going on for 40 years, and that there's 125 people that have been killed by this thing, and he starts doing research that this creature is real, and it could be found in the Bahamas, and he meets Elaine, and it changes his life, and they go together, and the two of them start formulating what in the world is they start getting an idea. All right, how are we going to deal with this thing? How are we going to identify it? How are we going to track it? And how are we going to stop it? And that's basically where part 2 ends.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And you were saying how you have 3-act structures within your chapters.
Right.
Which is that's logical. That makes sense. Because when I do this 3-act thing and I pair it with a word budget, it could be for anything. It could be for flash fiction. It could be for a short story. The actual length is not, that's the thing about the 3-act structure. It plugs into anything.
Right.
So when you're writing your chapters, you don't have, you're not using a 3-act structure, but you can sense it. After you wrote it, what do you sense about it, and is there any conscious contact? By that I mean, it's my opinion, if not the opinion of JWC, that creativity comes from unconsciousness, which is why so many writers have kept dream journals. And you yourself said specifically that Emily came out of a dream, a fever dream. And no doubt the delirium of diseased consciousness prepared your mind in a certain way. And then you had that fever dream. So let's just say for the time being, since we have no definitive proof, but I believe it. But unconsciousness is from where creativity comes from. It's its origin point, and consciousness has to make contact with it, which is the act of inspiration. And inspiration is the highest coin in the realm for writers like us. Whenever we're inspired and we feel stirred, which I had one the other day, man. Whew, this atom blister thing. It's way too much to unpack. But it was just like one of these first news flashes, and it comes from unconsciousness. It can come from dreams. It can come from a daydream. But there's a certain mode of consciousness that comes over you, and then, bam, there's my new idea.
Well,
right?
Yes, and also you have to couple that with a lifetime on my end. I don't know about you. Lifetime of reading. Everything imaginable, science fiction, fantasy, books about UFOs, books about abominable snowmen, mysterious creatures, mysterious disappearances. Jack the Ripper factors big time into my life. How could this guy have done all this and not be identified yet? It's been 125 years, and so all those thousands of stories and hundreds of nonfiction books and the Project Blue Book and Dr. Hynek and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It all goes in and becomes a gigantic filing system, and it's all the ideas and words and concepts are all intermingled up there, and that also is something to draw on for stories. That once in a while, two things cross-sect, and I'll say, hey, how about if I do this, or what if this happened, right? So,
and that's the thing. unconsciousness, I mean, you brought up the perfect point. Unconsciousness requires input because your collective unconscious, in the sense of Carl Jung, he talked about how, well, the instincts are the things that establish the archetypes. So, but when it's not instinctual, when it's actual like literary information, you have to take in massive quantities of what it is that you're hoping to write.
Hmm.
You must
Oh,
stand on
sure.
shoulders. Yeah, yeah. So there's archetypes of sense, but there's also patterns in other fiction. Like if you want to write horror, you read horror. You must read, otherwise, how? I mean, there are some people I'm sure who are geniuses or whatever, who just can base it off their archetypology. But the more you read, the way I've always experienced it, the more you read, the better that contact between
Sure.
consciousness and unconsciousness becomes, the networking of minds. So yeah, read, folks, read lots.
See,
Never stop.
I used to think that if I read a whole lot of, say, heroic fantasy, and I wanted to write my own, would I unconsciously steal concepts or ideas? I said, and I came to a conclusion that probably not. Is if you're conscious of what you're writing, and you can dance around Robert E. Howard's ideas and Tolkien and etc.
Yep.
Without stepping on their toes.
Yeah.
But you have to know what they wrote in order to avoid stepping on their toes. That kind of idea, right? So
Yes. There must be a striving for originality. And the more voices you hear, because the chorus of it all, you're trying to harmonize your own voice fulfillment with the chorus of all these others. And it's not plagiarism to be influenced, but if you can see what is derivative, then you have to keep going. Like Lovecraft wrote all of these, he called them Poe stories, and then he wrote Dunsany stories.
right.
And then he asked himself one day in his letters, where are my Lovecraft stories? Where are the ones? So there was a relentless pursuit for originality and individualism. And the more you read, the more voices you're exposed to, the more you will clarify your own voice fulfillment, so that you don't have to worry about that sort of thing. And I know you've read Oceans, and I read a fairly decent amount, but what I haven't read in Variety, I've obsessed by rereading and
Mm.
studying, trying to capture, well, what did these great ones do? Like if I love a chapter or if I love a novel, I'll just read that into the ground, and study it. And I try to discover what is it that I like about it. And
Mm.
that brings me to our next phase and one of our last phases, because boy, time flies when you're having fun, don't it?
Sure.
Yeah. So in this 3-act structure that takes us from muse flashes, which is the act of inspiration, the networking of minds, so beginning, a middle, and an end. So how do you translate that? And this is just me. You're the pants seater, and no one's telling you how to be. But how do you translate that 3-act structure into what you need industrially as a matter of book craft? So the industrial analysis breaks down
Mm.
to, out of 3 acts, how many chapters?
Ah.
The reason I say this is because your acts are meant as metadata for your muse to help orient the grand flow of the project, regardless of length. But when your muse is going to tell you how long it's going to be. Like
Sure.
when you were saying you had a secondary flash and you knew what your second act structure was going to be out of the 3. There's generally around that time you get the sense of, oh, well, this is a short story, or this is going to be a piece of flash.
Mm-hmm.
But the minute it gets detailed and there's world building, expo, characterization, deconstruction, and obviously a character arc, where the character is facing some sort of transformation, if not in the Joseph Campbell hero's journey sense, then it's in the sense of, well, they're immovable, but their life has been altered fundamentally. Even if they don't change,
Sure.
something has either been taken or given from them. So you find in the weaving of that, you find the length. Now, what I've been swinging for lately is between 50 and 60,000 words per book. My last couple, like Isaiah Stormworld's around that length. Nidhogg Chronicles around that length. Masroth longer, Babbletron shorter, but that's just based on the muse.
Mm-hmm.
50 to 60,000 words. Some authors, when they write novels, it's 100,000 words, and it fits cohesively, and they have enough. I mean, they're so prolific. There's the text, the characters. They're so everything's so voluminous that 100,000 words is almost like nothing. It's still
Sure.
one brick. I try to keep it short, and I try to keep my chapters short and uniform for an important purpose, which is the difference between narrative debt and narrative drivers. Okay, there's lots of ways of explaining this. Again, we're not breaking huge ground here, but the narrative debt is you introduce this incredible character or this incredible concept, and then people are going to want that beginning, middle, and end. They're going to want that 3-act structure to be present, and they're going to want to get like, okay, you gave us something cool. Now, what are you going to do with it? That's part of the execution and how you get to the 3rd act. You're worried about length. You're worried about, is this an individual project? And that's the thing about narrative drivers. This is what I call them. This is what drives the narrative, what pushes the story to pay the narrative debt off. In other words, if you read Babbletron, my novella, Big Daddy is the main character. He goes through all these adventures. He loses his old life. And these things drive us forward. And there's a building of tension that is balanced against the debt of, well, this is our main character. How is he going to deal with this one? The reader will ask. And then it's piece by piece. All these things inform your 3rd act. Now, another thing is to take these acts and plug them into the word budget, which, like I'm saying, I'm writing lately between 50 and 60,000 words. So in this instance, it's easy. If it's 60,000 words, then Act 1 is 20,000 words. You have to introduce your main character. You need to go over where they came from, origin, birth, genesis of main character.
Main conflict.
Main conflict, main concept that's driving all this stuff. And you can do that in 20,000 words. And I choose to take that 20,000 words and compute the average chapter length. For me, my chapters are about 2,000 words. So this is how I would recommend. And again, you're a pants eater. I dig it. Don't ever change. I ended up evolving into this state, but it's to me it's helped. I mean, I've been getting a lot more books out a lot faster.
That's
with
good.
outlining. Yeah. So I know you're not huge with word budget, but what's your average chapter length?
Okay, Blood on the Sand, the chapter lengths have been 8 to 10 pages.
And that's in a marble notebook because you write your first draft with pencil, right?
With pen, right.
Pen.
Yeah, 8 to 10 pages. I don't know what it is that when I'm writing, the chapters just come to a natural end. I said, okay, and I started another chapter. Emily is a completely different story. Emily, each chapter is actually a story, a separate story, and if you remember, right, right.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But the wild thing is the her second life is about 30 pages. Then her fourth life is 50 pages. And so by the time we get to life number 7, her seventh life is 50,000 words, and it's 180 pages is her seventh life because the story just kept getting more and more complicated
Of
as it went. You
course.
know,
Yeah, yeah,
as
sure.
more and more remember, she had more and more things to remember, more and more things trying to avoid getting killed,
Yep.
which doesn't work really well because it
No.
happens
Yeah.
7 times.
It's
Um,
inevitable. It's inevitable. She's trying though. What is she gonna
yeah,
do?
but the seventh life is I think the third act of my third act structure is the seventh life, because that's where I knew this is her last life. It's got to count. I've got to make it really count. So, and then no spoilers, but there is an eighth chapter after she dies the seventh time. I had a little bit of a struggle where I said, okay, now I have to tell everybody why she was dying, and that was for the eighth chapter. No clue, a few clues scattered here and there, but basically it was just straight adventure to the end of her seventh life, and it said, okay, here's what happened, here's why it happened. So
Well, this has been a fantastic episode of JWC live stream, a JWC story autopsy with Ricky and Tom. We went over the Florida novel. We touched on cryptids and their mystery. I unpacked my whole theory, and again, I didn't invent it, but
no,
my take on the 3-act structure and how I plug it into an industrial component. And we got some data from you on this too. I mean, I know you're a pants eater, but all that input you gave, it'll help translate. And for the sake of the benefit of this process, writing novel after novel as we have over the years, and it's whatever improves the process.
sure.
So let's do plugs before we say bye bye to our wonderful listeners. You go ahead first, Tom.
All right,
Um,
I have a short story collection on Amazon Kindle, Amazon period. It's called Dwellers in the Shadows. There's a similar book, a biography about somebody who survived the Holocaust, I believe, that the subtitle is Dweller in the Shadows. You were to look for the cover that has a spider in its web on the cover, and it's starting to go. The sun's starting to set. It's a
yeah,
nice gloomy cover. Dwellers in the Shadows.
and it's
Uh,
Thomas Tiernan. Is that
right,
how it's
right,
listed? Okay. What I have on there is Babbletron After the Fire. That's on Amazon. It's Kindle and KDP, Kindle Direct Publishing. Babbletron After the Fire. That's Richard Andrew Olkus. You'll see some other books up there. Check them out. We're not going to lean into Book of Masteroth yet because we're still getting that KDP set up. But check out Babbletron. Let me know what you think. Check out Dwellers in the Shadows. Tom knows what he's doing with short stories, and those are some ghoulish tales waiting for you. And thanks a lot, everyone, for attending the live stream. And because we have fun doing this. It's our extended hand from the JWC community, Joe's Writers Club. Check us out, joeswritersclub.com, and sign up at joeswriters.club. And become a member of the community. And we have meetings on Tuesdays Eastern time, and we're changing it now. I think it's going to be from 7 to 9. We have a Zoom
right.
meeting. If you go to joeswriters.club, check it out, and tell us about your projects. We do reads, and we're going to start doing some reads on this show too. We take chapters of stuff that we just wrote, real first drafty, so no one needs to be sensitive or particular. We're trying to get the first thought, best thought draft of it, and it represents a creative obsession, which is we're working on creativity actively.
Mm.
So check us out on Tuesdays, and we're going to keep doing these live streams. I think we're starting to get the hang of it. So it was great as usual, Tom. Glad hearing about all your stuff, and you take care and say bye to our wonderful listeners out there.
Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you next